This man had 24 hours left. Too late. There was a man who was given something no one else had. Not money, not power, not fame. He was given exactly 24 hours left to live, and he knew it. There was no illness, no warning, just a quiet voice in his head one morning that said, "Tonight, your time ends." At first, he ignored it. People imagined they would panic in a moment like that. Screaming, denial, chaos, desperate calls to doctors and priests. But he didn't. He simply checked the time. 8 a.m., 24 hours. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time. The morning light came through the window. Birds were singing outside. His wife was in the kitchen making coffee. He could hear the sounds of her moving through their house, completely unaware that something fundamental had just shifted in the universe, at least in his universe. He thought about panicking. He waited for the fear to arrive, but it didn't come in waves. It came as a strange, quiet certainty, a weight that settled on his chest like something familiar, like something he had been expecting all along. At 8:05, he picked up his phone, emails, deadlines, meetings, the same routine he followed every day. His thumb moved on muscle memory, scrolling through messages from people he barely knew about things he barely cared about. Quarterly projections, client expectations, board meetings scheduled for next month. Next month? Something shifted in him as he read those words. Next month didn't exist for him anymore. There was no next month. There was only today. There was only now. But something else felt different, too. For the first time, it all felt small, trivial, like watching children argue over toys in a sandbox, like hearing a conversation in a language he didn't speak anymore. The urgency that had driven him for decades, the constant pressure, the endless rushing, it all suddenly looked hollow, meaningless. He set the phone down without responding to a single email. He walked into his child's room. His son looked up from his drawings, a picture of a house with smoke coming from the chimney, stick figures holding hands in the yard, and asked, with complete innocence, "Dad, are you busy today?" That question, that simple, devastating question. That question had always had the same answer. "I'll talk to you later. Daddy has work. Not right now, buddy." The reflex response of a man whose calendar was fuller than his heart, a man who had trained his son to expect rejection so thoroughly that the boy had stopped asking for very much at all. But not today. He sat down slowly on the bedroom floor, his business suit and leather shoes looking absurdly out of place among the toy blocks and crayons. And he said, "No, I'm not busy today." And he meant it in a way he never had before. It wasn't a promise he was breaking immediately. It wasn't a lie told to a child who would forget it by lunchtime. It was the most honest thing he had said in a decade. His son smiled, a real smile, not the uncertain one he usually gave, and said, "Will you play with me?" "Yes," he said, "I will." At 9 o'clock, he sat with his wife. No scrolling, no rushing, no glancing at his watch, just presence. At first it felt uncomfortable, like sitting with a stranger. The silence was too quiet. He didn't know what to do with his hands. How do you sit with someone after years of sitting beside them? But then something changed. They started talking, really talking, about things they hadn't said in years, about dreams she'd abandoned to support his career, about the person she used to be before she became his wife, about the person he used to be before he became his career, about the space between them that had grown so wide neither of them could remember how to cross it. She cried. He held her hand. And in that conversation, something broke open, not in pain, but in recognition. The recognition that they had been living like ghosts in the same house, present but invisible to each other, moving through days and months and years without ever truly seeing the other person. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." "I know," she said. "I know you are." At 11 o'clock he called his mother, not for a quick check-in, not to say, "I'll call you later." He just called and listened. She talked about her garden, about a neighbor who had fallen, about the book she was reading, small, ordinary details of a small, ordinary life, and he realized how much he had been missing. Not just her voice, though that too, her stories, her worries, her small observations about the world, things he had dismissed 1,000 times before as unimportant background noise. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You're listening so carefully." He paused. He could lie. He could say everything was fine. But what was the point of lying now? "I just wanted to hear your voice," he said. "I wanted to remember what you sound like when you're happy." He heard her smile through the phone. At 1 p.m., he canceled everything. Meetings, deals, plans, negotiations that had been months in the making. All the things he once thought were the architecture of his life, the foundations upon which everything else was built. His assistant sounded panicked. "Sir, we have a board meeting in an hour. They've been scheduled for 3 weeks. "Cancel it," he said. "But the investments?" "Cancel it." And something strange happened. Nothing broke. The market didn't crash. His company didn't collapse. The world kept moving. The emails piled up, but no one died. The deadlines passed, but reality did not crumble. Whatever he had been running toward all these years, it turned out it could wait. Or more truthfully, it turned out it could happen without him. That realization was more terrifying than death itself. He was not necessary. His hustle, his ambition, his constant rushing forward, none of it was actually essential. The world would continue. It would barely notice his absence. Other people would make other decisions. Life would go on, and in 100 years, nothing he had accomplished would matter at all. At 2:30, he opened his laptop. Not to work, but to look at old photographs, birthdays, vacations, random moments, moments he barely remembered being part of. Birthday parties where his son's face was bright with joy and he was on his phone in the corner. Beach vacations where his wife laughed in the sand and he checked his emails. Christmas mornings, first days of school, school plays. He saw his son's face at age 5, eyes bright with wonder, looking for him in the audience. And he realized he had been there, but he hadn't been present. His body was in the frame. His heart was somewhere else. At 4 o'clock he went outside. The sky looked different. Or maybe he was seeing it for the first time. The blue had depth. The clouds had movement. He noticed the way light fell through the trees in golden strands. He noticed the sound of birds. He noticed the smell of grass. He noticed that he had been alive in a world of extraordinary beauty and had been too distracted to see it. It was still here. It had always been here. He just hadn't been paying attention. At 5:30, he laughed. Not the polite laugh he used in meetings, but a real one, the kind that makes your chest hurt, the kind that comes from something true. His son was telling him a joke that didn't quite make sense with a punchline that wasn't funny. And he laughed anyway, and in that laugh was both joy and terrible sorrow. Joy at finally being alive, sorrow that it took the end to start living. By 7 o'clock, fear returned, not fear of dying. He had accepted that hours ago, but fear of realization. He wasn't afraid to lose his life. He was afraid of how he had lived it. He was afraid of all the moments he had skipped over, all the people he had half loved, all the days he had treated as rehearsal for a real life that never came. The real life never came. This was it. This had always been it. At 10 o'clock, he sat quietly, no noise, no distractions, just his thoughts. And one question kept repeating in his mind. Why did it take the end to start living? At 11:59 p.m., his heart was racing. His hands were cold. He was waiting. The house was dark. His family was asleep. He was alone with the sound of the clock ticking toward a moment that would end everything. 12 o'clock. Silence. 12:01. Nothing happened. He opened his eyes slowly. Still breathing. Still alive. Relief flooded him like a breaking wave. He had survived. He had made it through the night. But something else came with that relief. Something sharper, more dangerous than fear. A decision. "This changes everything," he whispered. The next morning he woke up early, smiling, ready to live differently. But at 8:05, his phone buzzed. Emails, meetings, deadlines. He paused for just a second, and then he picked it up and replied. At 9 o'clock, he rushed breakfast. At 11 o'clock, he ignored his son's question. At 1 o'clock, he rescheduled time with his family. By evening, he had completely forgotten the fear, forgotten the clarity, forgotten the truth. The voice was gone. The day had passed. He was alive again. And that, somehow, was permission to return to the old way of living. Weeks passed, then months. Life returned to normal, busy, fast, empty. The rituals of rushing returned, the constant checking of his watch, the careful measuring of time into minutes and meetings and metrics. Until one night, his son stood at the door of his study and said quietly, "Dad, you said you weren't busy anymore." And in that moment, everything came back. The voice, the day, the truth. And he realized something terrifying. The voice had been real. Not because it predicted his death, but because it showed him something worse. He didn't need to die to lose his life. He was losing it one ordinary day at a time. Most people think they have time. That's the illusion, the greatest lie we tell ourselves. Because life doesn't disappear all at once. It doesn't end in a single moment of crisis or collapse. Life disappears in pieces, missed conversations, delayed moments, postponed happiness, small choices made 1,000 times to prioritize the urgent over the important, days skipped over in pursuit of something better that never arrives. And one day, not in a voice in your head, but in the quiet realization of a child's disappointed eyes, you understand. There are no pieces left. So here is the truth you need to hear. You don't need a warning. You don't need 24 hours left to live. You don't need a voice in your head telling you the end is coming. Because if you're not careful, you will wake up one day and realize you never truly lived at all. So stop, right now. Before you finish reading this, stop. Look around. Really look. Breathe. Call someone. Sit with someone. Be present. Because the life you keep postponing, the conversations you keep delaying, the moments you keep deferring, the love you keep saving for later, it is not waiting for you. And one day, it won't be there anymore.